our next talk is going to be lessons learned at mine sites, and we have two people coming up. We have Wendy Naugle from CDPHE and Joy Jenkins from the EPA. Alternating. This is going to be a duet.
Hello.
She's going to have to put
I'm
that.
Wendy Naugle, and I am the State Project Manager for the Nelson Tunnel Superfund site here in Creede, and I'm also the site manager for the Egomind near Minto.
And I'm Joy Jenkins, and I am the, oops, sorry, I'm going to forget about the microphone. I'm Joy Jenkins, I'm the EPA Superfund Project Manager for the Nelson Tunnel Commodore Waste Rock Pile site. And this site is just up this road, about 3/4 of a mile or so. You can take a drive, if you got a moment, you can see, actually these images were taken just at the bottom of the site, so just maybe even a 1/4 mile from here. So, and as you can see, it also has historic buildings. Some of the buildings that Damon just showed are on this site, or not part of the site, but near the site. And this is in a historic mining area, and the theme of complexity fits very well with this site. The Watershed group, Willow Creek Reclamation Committee, as Gwen and Kent and Jen mentioned earlier today, has done a lot of work in this watershed and cleaned up various projects. This site was kind of one of the big complex issues, and that's why that came into the Superfund program. In 2005, as mentioned, there was a washout of the waste rock pile. And in 2008-2009 timeframe, EPA came in with their emergency response and did a removal action and stabilized that pile. The other reason for listing this site is the other main issue in this watershed is the draining Nelson Tunnel, and that is also a complex problem. It's a collapsed coral structure that drains about 300 gallons per minute of acid mine drainage.
So our presentation is going to focus on a few of the lessons that we've learned at some of the other sites that we've worked on, including the Egomind, the Captain Jack site, and the Gilt Edge mine, and how those lessons frame our investigations, our feasibility studies, and remedy selection at the Nelson Tunnel site.
So for this presentation, we're going to focus on 3 main concepts or lessons. That's accurately framing the starting points, planning for the worst case scenario, and taking the long view.
So the first lesson is accurately framing your starting point. This is really your baseline data collection and your site characterization. When you do a remedy, you need to have a good baseline data set to compare your post-remedy data against to see whether or not your remedy is successful. Baseline data needs for sites differ based on the site, but it could include surface water quality, groundwater quality, mine pool elevation, mine pool fluctuations, and mine pool water quality. You also need to characterize the range and the variability of each of these different parameters in order to have a good baseline data set. All right, so this is an example of a baseline data set for the Egomind. This is zinc concentrations in this stream over a 4-year period. And you can see that each spring we have a peak in zinc concentrations. This happens when the snow melts at the mine site. And this data set is from monthly grab samples. This shows that if you put in an automated sampler, you actually get a little bit different characterization of that zinc peak. And if your remedy was to reduce that zinc peak, you probably didn't have an accurate starting point for your remedy. Because with the auto data collection, you can see that the zinc peak was quite a bit higher than what we were getting with our grab samples.
So at the Nelson Tunnel site, in an effort to complete the remedial investigation in a timely fashion, we had used a little over a year of data collection. I think it was about 4 sampling events. And what we realized after the fact was that data set didn't accurately capture the seasonal and annual variability of what's coming out of the Nelson Tunnel and the surrounding area. It also didn't, that what we collected in that time frame didn't actually characterize the other sources, such as groundwater sources, that could have been contributing to the metals loading into the Willow Creek. So, in addition to that, we also recognized what our data showed was an indication of a mystery load that we focused on for a little while. And what we realized later was that that was because of incomplete mixing between creek confluences. We sampled a little too close to that confluence and didn't realize at the time until further sampling that the water just wasn't mixing well. So depended on where you took it across the width of the creek, what kind of loading we were calculating. So the other issue we realized was that the Nelson Tunnel has 3 natural impoundments in it. It holds quite a bit of acid mine drainage water. So over the years, that system has been monitored and observed, but on a kind of sporadic basis. We didn't have really good baseline data to know, what are the fluctuations of the mine pool levels, and what are some of the flow fluctuations as well. So what we did is, after completion of the remedial investigation, we realized some of these issues. We conducted additional monitoring activities to more accurately assess the mine pool conditions, as well as water quality in the surrounding watershed. And so what this graph is showing is in late 2013, early 2014, we started doing, with the support of Colorado DRMS, we have level indicators or pressure transducers with data loggers at 2 places in the upper mine pool, and that's the biggest mine pool in the Nelson Tunnel. These are accessed from the Commodore 5 level. There are vertical connections into the Nelson level where we can monitor the mine pool level. And so, as you can see, the blue squiggly line is the Berkshire shaft, and the light green squiggly line is the Del Monte raise. And then the red top line is temperature. Both red and purple are temperature of those 2 monitoring points. And as you can see, over this time frame from 2015 to, I think this ends 2016, or actually, I can't tell how long our data is, but it's several years of data now. And we can see how much variability and up and down those water levels go. And you can also see kind of the seasonal signal that we have. So now we have a much better understanding of the baseline variability of the system. So any remedy we put in place here will have something to compare that remedy against in the future.
So our next lesson learned is planning for worst case scenarios. So the Egomind NPL site near Minturn is kind of a poster child for worst case scenarios. The original remedy concept was to flood the mine workings, which would limit oxygen, and then that would improve the water quality within the mine pool. So 8 bulkheads were installed in the mine workings, and the mine workings were allowed to flood. The problem was that when the mine pool reached a critical geologic contact, there began to be seepage out of that contact. And in addition to that, mine pool water also got into some unconnected adjacent mine workings. So this is what it looked like in 1990 and 1991. On the left is seepage from that geologic contact, and there were several locations that had seepage like this. And then this is, back up. This is the Eagle River, and the Eagle River actually ran orange for quite some time, actually over a year and a half. And the problem here was that there was inadequate planning, for no contingency planning, very little monitoring, and inadequate site characterization.
So Wendy just mentioned some of these issues were about some of the bulkheads that were installed at the Egomind. So bulkheads can be very useful, but they need to be designed correctly and have realistic goals in mind for what the intended purpose is. So a bulkhead or a flow control structure has many useful purposes, and they can prevent a large sudden release from natural impoundments in the mine tunnel system, and they can also protect certain areas from direct discharge of acid mine drainage. But if you're going to install one and plan to include that in your remedy, you want to ask a couple questions, such as, what if there are impacts to other adjacent mine workings or fracture zones, and you get leakage somewhere that you didn't expect to get leakage. How will those unintended changes be observed or mitigated? And in your planning, you need to have the ability to monitor at various locations, and you also need to be able to have a plan for what you do to mitigate those unintended consequences.
So how are we applying this at the Nelson Tunnel site? For any future bulkhead construction at Nelson Tunnel, we will be installing a valve because we do have to have continuous flow from that mine in order to satisfy water rights. But also it just doesn't make sense here to try and keep all the water in the mine because there's a lot of connectivity between the different mine workings and it would require multiple bulkheads. We also will have accurate redundant monitoring equipment, and we have a good baseline like Joy showed you already in terms of the mine core fluctuations and something to compare against. So the next example is to take the long view. Early mine site remedies were really believed to be short-term and in some cases walk-away remedies, but what we found is that changes in conditions over time and also inadequate design on remedy components that have to be in place for long periods of time have impacted the resiliency and longevity of some of our designs. And Joy has some examples.
Okay, so there's probably many things we could have focused under on this topic, but we wanted to focus on anticipating changing weather patterns. So it's something we've probably all starting to feel or have seen at various sites. So the first example is at the Captain Jack Mill site. This is near Ward, Colorado, in the foothills of Boulder County. And we've built 2 waste rock repositories there, and those have surface water precipitation run on and run off controls. We designed those for a 500-year storm event, which is a pretty large event, and not always in the concept of most remedy designs. But in this case, we're lucky enough to have the space available, and we have the materials available on site. So this is a very economic, feasible cost-wise to do at the site. So that proved to be necessary in the 2013 floods. The remedy was completed in the fall of 2012. If those floods had come a year earlier, there would have been mud everywhere. But because we had that year for the repositories are soil covers with prairie grass vegetation, because we had that year for those cover materials to establish themselves, and we had very large run-on and run-off control water management structures. Our remedy did really well. So who could have predicted storms of that magnitude to roll through that area? We don't know exactly what fell on the Captain Jack Mill site, but estimates of that general area were between 1,000-year and 500-year storm events during that 2013 flood. So our remedy performed really well. We were happy to see, as Mary Boardman will talk about another aspect of this site later on this afternoon, but the first time we went up there, we were pretty nervous. And when we got there, we were pleasantly surprised at how well the remedy performed. So in the picture on the right side, that's the beginning of the repository cap. And then in the middle is the riprap channel for the runoff control. To the left, that slope side there you see, that's the native ground. And so that's where our issues came in, and they were really minor. Had a little bit of erosion from the native ground where sediments landed in our run-on control. There was also some minor road damage. But by comparison, driving up Left-Hand Creek, Left-Hand Canyon, the devastation was massive. Pieces of asphalt were just gone on the road. We saw a car flipped over with rocks on top of it. Obviously, they got a lot more water because they collected a lot more drainage, but this was definitely one of those cases where, anticipating the worst case scenario paid off.
So we're going to skip ahead a little bit here. Just talk about the Nelson Tunnel real quick. This is the design of the Commodore waste reptile remedy, and we did design for that peak flow, and we have large riprap and stilling basins to dissipate the energy, and that has been in place since '09 and has been very effective, but we haven't had any real major flood events since then. And oops, that's our conclusions there. Just some questions to ask yourself when you're designing a remedy. What data sets do you need? What are the worst case scenarios for the remedy? and how long will the remedy need to be in place?
And so this is where it's important to collect that robust baseline data, such as water quality, water quantity, all the seasonal variability, annual variability, because in the end, poor decisions are made from poor data. And then the other question you want me to focus on is, what are the worst case scenarios for the selected remedy?
How much time do we have? Are we there?
10 seconds.
10 seconds, okay.
10, 9.
Well, let me finish with this. So I also wanted to, for the people that are local in this area, I wanted to introduce our 2 new team partners on this project. Ross Davis is joining us from CDPHE to work on the Nelson Tunnel site. And then Dania Zinner is joining us from EPA to also work on the Nelson Tunnel site with us.
Thank you. Stick around for a second.
So that was interesting. I have a question. On one of the slides there, you said there was minor road damage. I'm going back to my problem with homonyms. Are you saying it was caused by kids under 18?
No.
Maybe we should talk about this at the break. Water was under 18 years of age.
Yeah, it was. The water was very new.
Very new, young water.
young
Very immature water causing these problems. So I love the fact that on the one you designed for a 500-year flood, what was the size of the storm?
Well, we're not sure what actually hit that area, but it was anywhere between 500 year and 1,000 year. It was probably a little less at our site because it's a little higher in the watershed. But Jamestown was like hit by, I think, 1,000 year flood then.
Yeah, so we talk about, long-term planning in some of these situations, and I think, when I think about long-term, I think about the long-term reactivity of a mine that is well beyond our lifespans and beyond the lifespans that we can even think about. And then we think about 500-year events. We will never see a 500-year event. Sure we will on occasion.
Yeah.
Somewhere out there, 2 engineers that over-designed that project are trying to give each other a high five. But they're engineers, so they probably missed the high fives. They're just not good at that. So, oh, you're an engineer? So what's going to happen is you're going to try to high five, and one of you's going to hit me. It's going to look like a mistake. So how about some questions from you all? Go ahead.
For both the Egomind and Nelson Tunnel, have you looked at the feasibility of treating the groundwater above those sites before it flows into the mine area?
So the question is about treating groundwater or water before it gets into the mine workings. And actually that is a very important part of the remedy of Egomind is that we have a deep pumping well that pumps clean water out of an adjacent mine working before it flows into the Egomind, and that pumps at about 150 gallons a minute, and that's 150 gallons of water that does not have to be treated at the water treatment plant. So that was a feasible alternative at Eagle, and at Nelson we have looked at it, and we've had a couple of different proposals and gotten bids even for drilling a well that could possibly be used as a pumping well, but we haven't gotten to a decision point on that yet.
But those are dealing with diluting. I'm talking about somehow putting a cap over the ground area above these mines to treat and deal with the water coming in.
So at the Nelson Tunnel, we've looked at that, like what would be the acreage of land that might be infiltrating water. At the Nelson Tunnel specifically, we think the majority of the water is actually coming up from old groundwater, and only a smaller percentage of it is coming down as infiltration into that system. So maybe you could cap some of it, but it would maybe knock off 10 or in the low percentage, like 10-20% of that water that comes in. With the potential drilling to extract groundwater before it gets to the system, we're talking about like a 2,000-foot deep well, and getting that on mark is what the challenge is. Like how do you? It's like a needle in a haystack in a way. So, but we definitely looked at those options, but they're not coming out as like for sure silver bullets at the moment.
Hi. I really appreciate your commentary on baseline data, but the one thing that's obvious about all of these sites is you can't have true baseline. And so I'm wondering how background figured into your what is appropriate and reasonable remedy.
Yeah, so it's you're in a so this is where we are at Nelson Tunnel. So we haven't selected the remedy yet. We're working on getting there. And For us, we look at the background water that's coming, so if we're looking at Nelson Tunnel, it's a little bit similar situation, I think. We're looking at the Nelson Tunnel and the site's contribution. So we're looking at the water quality above it as well as a comparison, so the creek coming into that area. And when we're looking at soils, we look at background soils from the area, like, for instance, we have manganese in background soils. And so any remedy associated with soils has to take that into consideration. So it's probably a slightly simpler situation here than what you're talking about. But yeah, that's definitely a challenge. You know, Superfund circular specifically says you don't treat background contamination, but at these historic mine sites, it's very difficult to understand what background is.